today. We are making Chana Saag, which is chickpeas and spinach curry. Is there anything to add to that, Chana?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it a little bit more later, but I was doing a little bit of reading on like the term curry and on what it means because it has so many meanings. Like, I don't know, you could have a Penang curry and it's very different than Chana Saag curry. And curry kind of just became like a catch-all name for a lot of foods from Asia, especially Southeast Asia. But this is specifically called Chana Saag. And so, yeah, I'm excited to dive into it.
Yeah. And a few little tech reminders. We have some people on the webinar here, and Chana will manage that, and we'll manage the chat. And we have a few people on YouTube, so Chana will be monitoring that as well. So if you have anything you want to contribute, we will be asking some questions here and there. Feel free to contribute via the chat or the comments.
Okay, I'm just going to promote Lynn to be the interpreter. I think that means that I make Lynn also a panelist. Is that right, Gina? I
think so.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to start out with a few things that I did before this live stream has started. I already got the rice going. I have about 20 minutes left on that. I am making brown rice, and brown rice will always take a little longer than white rice. Something else that I also did was I washed my cans, the lids, real fast, and I took out my ingredients. I have frozen spinach. The recipe says that you can use frozen or fresh. I decided to go with frozen and canned tomatoes. You are welcome.
Gina, sorry, 1 second. I just haven't actually been able to get Lynn as the interpreter yet.
Okay.
I'm typing in Lynn's name into the interpreter chat. Thanks for bearing with me, everybody. But I don't know how to.
But it's not popping up, right?
Okay, there's now two Lynn's. Maybe because.
Oh, let me get out. I log in twice.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay, now I've got you. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right, you're good to go, Gina.
So I'm just talking about what I did before we started today. I took out all my ingredients. I got the rice cooking already. There's about 20 minutes left on that. I have the timer on. The recipe says that you can use fresh tomatoes or frozen. Fresh tomatoes or canned tomatoes, fresh spinach or frozen spinach. I decided to go with frozen spinach and canned tomatoes. I washed the cans, everything is out. One thing I want to mention about efficiency or some cooking tips I want to share is that this recipe has a lot of things to be measured out. Like it's got a couple of spices, it's got a few cups of things like spinach and coconut milk. And I don't like to wash too many things. So what I like to do is I actually lay out some of my measuring spoons and cups, and I kind of use that as like an eyeball reference. So I'm gonna start with ginger. So the recipe calls for a tablespoon of ginger. So I have the tablespoon out, and it's about a 2-inch piece of ginger root.
Your tablespoon looks so big.
Definitely. That's why I always have it out, because in my head I imagine tablespoons to be a regular spoon, but it's not. So I have to have it out for visual reference. So I like to leave that out to look at, but at the same time I also like to just have it on hand for like real fast measuring. Okay. And first things first, my hair is tied back. I have my apron on. My knife is out. I leave it at the top of my chopping board. Underneath my chopping board, I have a paper towel that is wet so that way my chopping board does not shift around as I am using it. So those are all kind of check. My hands are washed, and I am gonna just jump into it. I already minced the garlic, but just a demo. I like to mince garlic by doing a quick little whack on the knife of the blade, sideways blade, and I like to make sure my fingers are not in the way. So like that. Might as well just add another garlic to this. One of the things that we are always stressing in Cooking Matters is that you can never have too little garlic. This recipe calls for 5 garlic cloves. I already have 5, so here is 6. And true to Shana's nature, I am not doubling it, but I am adding more to it. Okay. And then I like to scrape with the back end of my knife. That way I don't dull the blade.
Smart. I know a dull knife is not only dangerous, but it's just so frustrating.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this in our first demonstration, but I'll go ahead and reiterate it. I personally like to keep the ginger skin on. However, if you don't want to have the ginger skin along with the ginger, you can use a regular metal spoon and face it away from you, put your thumb behind it, and start kind of like peeling away. And this is really effective in getting just the skin and the least amount of potential root. So you have more ginger. You're not losing it to shaving off some of the skin. So here's a fair amount that I took off, but I'm gonna keep the ginger skin on because honestly, it's just more ginger, and I want that. So
and it's perfectly safe to eat too. Like it's a little bit tougher, but it's not. As long as you wash it, it's perfectly safe to eat.
Mm-hmm. So one of the hot tips that our coworker shared is that she likes to freeze ginger, so it's a little easier to cut and mince. And I actually did that, and I think it's working.
I think that what she does, and I think what you're doing is great too, but she actually freezes it so it's easier to grate.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Is it easier to cut though too?
It slices a little bit better. It's a little less hairy.
It's like stringy.
Yeah, a little less stringy. Okay. Yeah, so we're making a curry today, and one of the topics that we talked about in our Tuesday session is that we want to emphasize pantry meals, and curry is definitely a favorite pantry meal of mine. A lot of flavor, really easy to make, a few simple ingredients. Chana, do you want to talk a bit more about pantry meals?
Yeah. I think it's really cool. We talked about it in class, but I think it's really cool that everyone's pantry is so different. So everyone's pantry meals are going to be different. I know that both Gina and I have talked about a lot, but we like to keep a lot of these ingredients for this recipe in stock just because they're foods that we like. So like coconut milk, ginger, garlic, onion, frozen vegetables like spinach, canned tomatoes, and spices are all components of a pantry that you don't need to have on hand. Everyone's will be different, but this is a really good pantry meal that Gina and I both really like. And rice, of course. And so it's good to have, we mentioned the week before last, having fruits and vegetables frozen or canned can be really good for having them all the time so that you know that you can put them into you can have fruits and vegetables in every dish, or at least most dishes of your day. Or you can use fresh as well for whatever your recipe calls for.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I finished mincing the ginger. And again, for eyeball reference, I had this in front of me. It almost looks about correct. But just in case, I like to scoop it in. Kind of make sure. All right, that's about a tablespoon. I made a little bit more, but I'll take it. I will take it. The next thing on the recipe list is to dice an onion, and to Shayna's tip that she taught us last week, I had it in the fridge, so let me go get that.
I know, I still cried from it, so hopefully you have better luck than I did.
We'll
I feel like each onion is so different though, you know?
Yeah. So what am I doing with this knife technique here?
You got that flat edge, that's really good, really safe.
Mm-hmm. Taking the skin off right now behind the cameras. So this
And you're
recipe
lucky your face isn't on the screen, so people can't see if you cry.
This is actually a part of the whole strategy. Just kidding. That's actually just convenient. Sometimes the skin's a little hard to get, so I like to give it a very shallow cut. I don't know if that was obvious. Just a little shallow cut like that. And that peels back at least the first layer. But take off the skin that way as well. Right. Sorry, I am behind the camera doing this.
A little behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And onion, as Gina mentioned, onion is in this recipe, and that's something that I always like to have in my pantry. Where do people, you're welcome to answer in the chat or on the YouTube channel, but where do people usually store their onion? Because it can be kind of important for its longevity. It lasts for a pretty long time, but Gina had hers in the fridge, but probably just for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you can keep your onion. You want to keep it usually like a cool, dark place. So you can put it in like a basket or in something that's, and I see in the chat, I keep mine on the countertop. Yeah. So you just generally want to keep it out of somewhere really hot or like a lot of direct sunlight, because it can cause it to sprout faster. Like, when your onion starts to sprout. Yeah. And you could put it in the fridge before you cut it. Is it helping with the crying, Gina?
Not really, but it's okay. I'm off. For the most part, I'm off camera.
It's really funny.
So this recipe says diced onions. So that is about a 1/4 inch. But it's also up to what you prefer. I'm going to make this curry. I don't know if anyone read the recipe all the way through before this demo, but it does ask that if you want to puree the curry at the end, that is okay, and it's part of how you make curry. Or you can leave it chunky. I'm leaving it chunky, and because I'm leaving it chunky, I do want to make sure that all my pieces are about a diced size, because it's going to be bite size. I'm aiming for it to be bite size. Yeah. Okay.
And I think you can definitely, I kind of like my chunky, but yeah, you can definitely puree it. You could also puree part of it. So puree is like when you put something in a blender or a food processor, and make it more liquid, more, it's not the right word, more one texture throughout. I think if I were to do it, if I were to puree it, I would probably only puree half of it, because I like having part of it chunky, part of it not, because it kind of thickens up the brothy part.
Yeah. Okay. And I don't know if anyone's paying attention to how I'm holding the knife. I am doing a pinch grip. And I did use the claw at some point. Okay. I am totally tearing up, but it's okay.
And feel free to share in either the chat on the Zoom or in the chat of the YouTube if you have a tip for me and Gina about how to not cry. Because clearly ours are not working.
Yeah. I think my only suggestion is to do it fast.
But not too fast if you're new to chopping.
Yeah. Okay, so I am done with the pre-cooking part of the prep, which is mincing the ginger and garlic and dicing the onions. And what we have created here is our aromatics. Yeah, so I actually chose this recipe because it had a fair amount of aromatics to work with.
And what are aromatics?
Aromatics are either an herb, spice, or a vegetable where its purpose is for flavor. So yeah, so I started my stovetop to medium low heat. Add.
Ooh, I really love the different angles we've got.
Some oils to it. And once that is warmed up, I'm going to do something called sweating the onions. There's a difference between sweating, browning, and I think, is it sauteing or caramelizing? Yeah. So before we get into that, does anyone remember how we know if the oil is hot enough?
Ooh, great question.
Yeah. Share in the comments or the chat. Oh, hi. I'm still up. Some people can just look at it, and I think some of the words I've heard people say is if it looks shiny. Oil always kind of looks shiny to me, so it's kind of hard to tell. One thing that I like to do is see how quickly it moves in the pan. If it still kind of drags, it's not very warm yet.
Yeah, it kind of becomes like quicker.
Yeah. It's more gel-like when it's cold, and when it's hot enough, it moves more like water. Chana, what's your, how do you know if oil is hot enough?
I like to usually put like one piece of what I'm cooking in and see if there are bubbles that come up around it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if I do it carefully, I like get a little water on my finger and like will carefully kind of flick it into the pot. It can, the reason I say carefully is that it can kind of splash back. So just being careful not to do that.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's put one piece of onion in it because we are going to sweat the onion as the next step anyways. I can see that the water isn't moving. I mean, the oil isn't moving too fluidly. Actually, maybe it's just hot enough right now. Okay, we're going to test it with one piece of onion.
And it looks like Naomi says that she usually puts a stick or a chopstick in the oil and see if it bubbles, and if it does, the oil is hot enough.
Yes, I have heard of that trick before. I haven't actually tried it myself though. Okay. I'm not sure how clear it is, but it is a little bubbly. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in the onions, garlic, and ginger. Give it a good little mix so everything's coated and has contact with the pan. And we're going to leave this for about 5 minutes to make sure that the onion is properly sweated out and that the garlic and ginger, the flavors have been released. So I'm going to take this moment real fast to talk about that. So sweating the onions is different than browning the onions. Browning and caramelizing really makes it super sweet. But sweating it kind of retains some of the stinging flavors of onion. And
can you speak more into the microphone, Gina? I can't. You said the what flavor of the onion?
So sometimes, so sweating the onions kind of lets it have two elements of it. Caramelizing it makes onions really sweet, but sweating it brings out the sweetness and retains some of that, like, I don't really know how to describe it, but that like tart,
like
feeling.
The bite of it.
The bite, is that what it is? A bite of?
I don't know. That's what I think of it as.
Yeah, okay. My timer just went off for the rice. I'm going to turn that off. You move that up, take that off of heat.
Ooh.
Okay.
It looks like it's sweating it.
Yeah. Yes. So, I know that this is going to take 5 minutes and I'm giving good mix, but I don't have to sit here and watch it. What I am going to do in this time is I'm going to measure out my spices because that's the next step.
Nice. What spices are in here?
We have cumin.
Oh, my fave, our fave.
I have paprika. It's not labeled, but that's paprika. And I have garam masala.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, and I have my bowl for what I'm going to mix it into. And I'm looking at the recipe and it says half teaspoon. Go ahead and take my half teaspoon.
It's kind of cutting out again a little bit, the audio.
Oh.
I know that. So we mentioned in the I think, did we mention last week, the garam masala is a spice blend. So it's widely used in a lot of cuisine from India. And it's actually made, I think Gina will talk about this a little bit more, but by cooking, like toasting whole spices. So in a pan, toasting cinnamon, mace, peppercorn, coriander, cumin, and cardamom pods, and sometimes other things too. And the roasting kind of releases some of those flavors, and then it's ground into a powder. So if you don't have garam masala at home, you can sub in a combination of those spices that you might have. So if you have ground cinnamon, ground black pepper, ground coriander, cumin, cardamom, nutmeg, cloves, sometimes fennel, mace, or bay leaves. And with bay leaves, you just want to make sure you take it out at the end, because I know the first time I used it, I didn't realize that. And I think I tried to eat it. So just kind of take it out once it's cooked. But you also might have heard of a spice called curry powder. And I know that that's something I have in my pantry and I use a lot. And I actually recently found out that it's not a common ingredient used in traditional Indian cooking at all, but actually an invention of from the British. So the British colonized India actually for the purpose of spices. And it was not really good for the country of India economically at all. There was a lot of wealth created by the spice trade, but that was usually that wasn't really invested back into the country of India. It was actually kind of invested back into the British Empire. So curry was kind of this invention from the British colonizers to evoke the flavors that they saw in Indian cuisine. And it doesn't mean that it's bad or that you shouldn't use it necessarily, but just knowing the history is pretty interesting. And curry powder is made out of ground coriander, ground cumin, turmeric, ginger, dry mustard, black pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, cayenne, or ground chilies. And so, yeah, just learning about like the different spices that are used really tells a lot about like the history of places and the way that a lot of the food that we eat is really shaped by colonization.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So I haven't measured out the spices, and I always love to just look at it. It's so colorful.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah, so I just want to reemphasize that we are working on the aromatics right now. I am bringing out the flavor out of the onions. I'm bringing out the flavor out of the garlic and ginger, and I'm going to add this to the aromatics that are cooking right now. And what I'm going to do is essentially add spices to oil. And when you add spices to oil, it blooms them. What that means is that you're toasting or you're frying the little spice bits. And that brings out the flavor. And aromatics is a great alternative to salt. And Chana will talk a bit more about that a little later. But, if flavor is a concern, this is a great way to add more flavor to your food. And speaking of blooming spices, you want to do it in some sort of fat, butter, oil, or something, because a lot of the compounds and the flavors in the spices are fat soluble. And also when you have spices infused with fat, it coats your mouth a little bit more.
You like taste it more.
Yeah, it has a lot more depth of flavor. So that is what we are doing and emphasizing with this recipe. You can go ahead and add it now.
That's awesome. Does it start to smell good over there?
Oh, so good. I am so sorry y'all are over Zoom.
I feel like I can smell it. I know I say that each time, but just looking at it.
Okay, so one thing about blooming spices is that you don't want to leave it on for too long. They are very tiny, so it doesn't take long for it to kind of cook through and toast. And you can do it without oil. It won't be as deep of a flavor, but it is still tasty and will do better than just kind of like cold, plain spices. Spices are not plain at all, by the way. Okay. So the next, one of the things that I did in that time Chana was sharing about the origin of curry and spices is that I measured out the spices, as I had mentioned, and I also opened all the cans. So I kind of took that time to open my beets, my tomatoes, and my coconut milk. I love coconut milk.
I saw you got low sodium beans. That's awesome.
Sure did. Okay, adding tomatoes. Give that a good little mix. Okay. Just a reminder that it is on low or medium-low heat. I'm working with a cast iron, so I really need to be cautious of the temperature.
And I know that we mentioned in the second week of class that some fruits and vegetables have more nutrients when you heat them up. And so canned tomatoes are heated when they're packaged, and they actually release more of a nutrient called lycopene, which is like a really strong antioxidant that's found in tomatoes and other like red fruits and vegetables. And actually heating it up makes it more able for your body to absorb it.
I just added 3/4 teaspoon of salt. Gonna give that a little mix again. So if anyone has read through the recipe, you may have noticed that there are a lot of 5-minute increments of this recipe. And if you have children with you in the kitchen, it is really fun to just have them be the time monitor. It's a very simple task, and in case they forget, you still can remember. All right. Turn it up a little bit. Okay.
I know that with kids it's really fun too to like kind of smell the different spices, and sometimes with the exception of really spicy things, like let the kids decide how much to add of the spices. I did one time cook with some kids in my life, and they kind of dumped some cayenne. So I usually leave the spicy things out until I can add them, but it's really fun.
If you are using fresh tomatoes, the 5 minutes is very crucial in terms of just kind of softening those tomatoes. But yeah. So in this 5-minute time, I'm going to get my little strainer, and I'm going to strain this low sodium can of beans. Chana, do you want to talk about salt concentrations?
Yeah, so one reason why we strain and rinse the beans is to get off, even though Gina got some low sodium beans, to get off some of that additional sodium. And so we'll be actually talking about salt pretty in depth this coming week in class on Tuesday. But salt is something that's really, really crucial for our bodies, the sodium in salt. But it's really, really common that most people get actually too much salt. And too much salt can lead to some like heart problems, some cardiovascular problems. So we like to think about how can we flavor our food without just using salt. How can we flavor our food if we don't have the exact spice that's listed? How can we flavor our food with spices we grow, like all these kinds of things? And we talked a little bit about growing spices last week. But healthy food does not have to be bland. Adding a lot of spices and a lot of herbs and a lot of onions and ginger and garlic can be really good for you. And salt, definitely a little bit of salt will bring out those flavors too. And so it's not that we're not adding salt, we're just kind of being more aware of how much salt we add. Sometimes it will say in a recipe like salt to taste. We try to make sure that our recipes always have an amount of salt just so you can use that amount and try it. And obviously you can always add more if you need to, but most things in our food are actually kind of over salted. So what do you do if you don't have the spice that you need? So to say Gina didn't have, we kind of talked about what you would do if you didn't have garam masala, because you could use the spices that are made up of it. But what would you do if you didn't have, you know, the cumin or the paprika or the cayenne pepper or the lemon juice, like some of these flavors? And you can answer in the chat or you can answer in the YouTube.
Okay, and in that time of the tomato simmering, if you had noticed, I had measured out the spinach and measured out half a cup of water that will go in with it. And here is my drained beans. Put it in a bowl in case it's still dripping. Right. Looks pretty good, the tomatoes.
Yeah, it looks really good.
And you know, spices is an area in flavoring that I like to consider an area you can be creative with. So if I don't have something that a recipe calls for, I tend to just try to find an alternative. And if you don't have fresh spices and herbs, as sometimes some recipes call for, sometimes dried also works as well.
Yeah, we talked about how to grow a little bit of fresh herbs last time, which can be really helpful because I know when I go to the store and get some fresh herbs, they give me a lot of them and sometimes it goes bad before I can use it all, which just ends up wasting money for me. If you're able to try growing like a little bit, like a pot of something in your window, or if you have any green space, it can be a really good way to save money. Or if you know anyone, if you have a neighbor or something. But yeah, the amounts that you would use for dried versus fresh can sometimes be different, and also that when you add them. So usually you want to add dried herbs earlier in a recipe, whereas fresh herbs you add at the end. Otherwise they kind of get like a little bit too wilted, and they'll have that like kind of crispness of the flavor when you add them.
Okay, so if you have not increased the heat from medium low to medium, do it now. And I added a little bit of water as the recipe suggests, so it's not too dry and it has the ability to kind of cook through. Sorry, I think I was blocking the screen. Okay. All right. Okay, I love this stuff because it like brings all the colors together. And right now it's just this like,
it looks so beautiful.
Rainbow. It looks good, and again, I'm sorry, y'all. It also smells good. I wish you can be here. And
we mentioned, I think in the second week, that different produce, like different fruits and vegetables that are different colors, actually have different nutrients in them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really cool to get a bunch of different kinds because then you're actually like really maximizing the amount of nutrients that you get.
So I'm gonna let this simmer at medium heat for about 5 minutes. Let's see here.
Awesome.
And then let's see. Chana, did you already talk about saving money on spices?
I didn't. Well, I kind of did. I talked about, you know, maybe having fresh herbs available, but spices, as you know, can be kind of expensive, especially dried spices. And so we often recommend, if you're able, to get your spices in bulk. So what that means is like that some stores will actually have, it's actually a little bit different now during COVID, so that's something to be aware of. But in bulk, they'll have like jars where you can actually like portion just the amount that you need. Because a lot of what you're paying for when you buy a jar of a spice is also just the jar and the convenience of it. We'll talk about the week after next, like the unit price, so the price per unit of something, and the unit price is a lot lower with buying spices in bulk than buying them packaged. We obviously have the luxury of using lots of spices in each class, so we buy all of our spices in bulk and kind of prepackage them, as you probably know, because we give them out as little packets. But you can also think about what, like Gina mentioned last week in class, like what recipes are your go-to? Like what specific spices does it make sense for you to invest in? Like maybe you don't need an entire giant spice cabinet, or maybe you do, you know, everyone's got a different pantry. But what do you use the most? And similarly, like when does it make sense to use a spice blend versus when does it make sense to use just the individual spices? So we used a spice blend today, garam masala. We used a Creole seasoning, which is another spice blend last week or the first week. And sometimes it makes sense to buy that, and sometimes it makes sense to buy the ingredients and kind of make it yourself. Could be cheaper. Masala is actually a word that means like a spice blend. And so it's kind of cool that it's pretty common in India for people to have, you know, every family I would have like a different masala for like garam masala or masala chai, like different ratios that are kind of unique to that family's, like, you know, kind of like your recipe secret ingredient. But yeah, garam masala is a really great spice blend. I know some people use like what's the one I'm thinking of? Chili powder or like a taco seasoning kind of spice blend.
Yeah.
Italian seasoning is another spice blend.
You know, I've lived with so many different people in my time. I have seen so many other people's like spice cabinets.
Right.
And I see so many different varieties of like, blends.
Right. I know everyone's is so different.
Yeah. Okay, so you can see it's bubbly and delicious, and I can't wait because my rice is already done. So here's lunch for me. So I'm going to reduce the heat. I'm going to reduce the heat on this, and I'm going to add the coconut milk. And as you notice, as Chana was talking, I spent kind of that time measuring out the coconut milk in a cup. So I like to, one of my little hot tips is that I like to have a measuring cup in the bowl that I'm going to, like, in the pot that I'm cooking it in or in a bowl. So that way if it spills, it just spills in the bowl as opposed to on the counter.
That's smart.
Yeah, same thing with rice. If I'm measuring out rice, I put the rice cup inside the pot. And then if it falls out, well, then I have a bit more. I also squeezed out about, I think the recipe called for a tablespoon of lemon juice.
Yes, a tablespoon.
Okay, perfect. So I kind of modeled it. Again, I use this for eyeballing. This is a tablespoon. This feels like about a tablespoon. Cooking is an art, you know, so it's a science as well, but it's also an art form, and it's a little bit more than a tablespoon. Good enough.
And it looks like it wants you to add the coconut milk, and then the last thing you add is the lemon juice and the cayenne.
Cayenne, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and add the coconut milk now. So I reduce the heat. So, okay, I gotta admit, part of why I chose this recipe was for the aromatics and for us to be able to talk about aromatics and how that's a great substitution for adding more salt. But really, I love coconut milk, and I just want to find every and any opportunity.
It's so creamy too. Like, I know today is so beautiful out, at least where I am, but in like the cold kind of fall and winter, having like warm spices and like a creamy coconut milk is really, really good.
I like what the color it creates. I love the depth of sweetness and nuttiness. I like it so much that, see this little measuring cup that has a bit of coconut milk left? I like to scoop a little bit of the food I'm cooking.
I thought you were going to spoon it out of there.
Just to get a little bit more. But you don't have to. This is not a part of the recipe. This is what I like to do.
The thing that I really love about this recipe too is that, like we talked about last week, meal planning can be really good for like batch cooking and batch freezing things. So I know that a lot of people meal prep by cooking a lot, like one day of the week, and eating that same thing every day. I have a really hard time with that personally. Like, I know it's like just a personal thing, but I don't like eating the same thing every day, but I can cook something and freeze it and eat it kind of throughout the month. And so like meal prep different things. And I think that something like this, like a Chana Saag, freezes really well. And like we mentioned last class, like having things pre-portioned and then heating up only what you need is a lot safer for food safety. So your food's not going through that temperature danger zone. And the Chana Saag, it's just I think it freezes really well. You can store it with the rice or you can store it separately. If you're going to be freezing it right away, just make sure you cool it before putting it in the freezer. And then if you want to eat it in the next couple days, definitely you can put it in the fridge. If it's longer than like 1 or 2 days after that, though, maybe just stick it in the freezer and put it in the fridge the night before you want to eat it.
Yeah, thank you. So this is done. We're done here. So you can do either of a couple of things. If you like your Chana Saag to be more liquidy, you can see that it has cooked through and it's bubbling, so it's effectively cooked. And you can call it here, get your rice and add it on top. I personally like it to be a bit thicker, so I'm going to let it sit on the stove for a few more minutes, stirring it occasionally so it doesn't kind of stick. And again, like the recipe mentioned, you can puree it in a blender to get it more smooth and consistent. If you really want to kind of get it to blend in with the rice or whatever you are eating with. It could be naan, it could be rice. I actually had it with noodles the other day. I didn't like it that much with noodles, but it's just because I had it on hand.
So it's good to try though. Why not?
It was. I had it on hand. It's a grain. Yeah, I think with the noodles I would have pureed it in a blender and then I had it with that. But I'm gonna have this with rice today. And I have my cayenne ready and my lemon juice ready for when it is done.
And the reason why we kind of add the cayenne and the lemon juice last is because lemon juice is fine to add to something hot, but when it cooks for a long time, the flavor changes. And then the reason why we add cayenne specifically at the end of this recipe is that cayenne kind of like increases in spiciness as you cook it. And so adding at the end means that we can kind of control the level of spice that we want. So if you love spicy things, you can put it in earlier or add more. And if you're not really sure, you can try out by adding a little bit less and then adding more later if you want.
Thank you. All right. So I hope this was helpful. I hope we demonstrated the recipe clearly. But if anything, I hope you learned a little bit about aromatics and salt alternatives. Yeah.
And feel free to leave any questions on this video or bring your questions to class on Tuesday. And we are really excited to see you next week.
All righty. Okay, happy Friday, everybody. I'm going to enjoy this Saag by myself.